Part 5, Bringing the Bubishi Back to Its Chinese Roots. Exploring the culture, the adventure, and the impact of martial arts. That's what we do at Kung Fu Podcast, and I'm your host, T.W. Smith. Thank you so much for joining me in this final part of the series where we've been bringing back the Bubishi to its Chinese martial arts roots. If this is your first time to the program, welcome. So glad you decided to join us. However, it would probably be better if you slid back 4 episodes and start with part 1 of this series, and then you would be right up to speed. I think each one of them around 20 to 30 minutes long, and be right back here at part 5 in a day or so, if you got that kind of time. If you'd like to quickly find all the episodes, just go to kungfupodcast.com/Bubishi, and they're right there on the same webpage. I'm trying to get my things ready. I'll be packing up a little bit later on this evening to go out to Dallas, North Carolina, just south of Charlotte, for the Shurite Bujitsu Kai seminar, the Martial Arts Science and Application Symposium. I'm really looking forward to seeing all of you out there who are going to be attending. I'm scheduled to teach for a few hours out there, and one of the time slots I'll be teaching Lohan and the Choli Foot, basically the Shaolin influences on Choli Foot Kung Fu, which has actually come up during this series. And the other one is going to be a seminar on every hand has a distance, or basically every technique has a distance, and how do you go about working and training, changing hands as the distance is changing. I'm really looking forward to seeing everybody, because the folks out there at that symposium are just like the folks here on this particular program. They're some of the finest and sharpest martial artists that you're going to meet, and I mean that sincerely. They're good people, and when you get out there and you train with them, they work hard, and they're still really good people. I've been around some folks, and I'm sure you have, whether it was on a football field, a wrestling mat, or a place where there was one trying to come over the top of the other. Like on a wrestling mat, there's only one victor. There's no 2 victors, and you can kind of see a whole new dimension of people in those type of situations. I can honestly say, all the times I've met people like Robert Taylor, Alex Ormaza, these folks who are excellent in their martial arts, they are still really good. Even as the intensities pop up, they're still fantastic gentlemen. They really take good care of you, and everybody works hard and gets a lot out of the programming. But anyway, thank you, Troy Price, for putting on that symposium, and I'm looking forward to seeing you all over the weekend. Now, as we're bringing this series to a close, in this particular episode, we're going to pick up on the understanding of Xiao Fa and Koju, where in the last episode, I explained what those were and how they were related yet different, and then also their place in traditional Chinese martial arts. And it gives you an idea where the internal and the external is supposed to come together. Internal is usually how you carry yourself, knowing your objectives, your strategies, your speed, alignments, and angles, feeling how things go. External is what you see, that component of how your bones move and how you flow from one technique to another. There's a lot of things that can go into Xiao Fa, the hand methods, or understanding more deeply Koju, the objective. We discussed all that in the last episode. Then after we finish up with Xiao Fa and Koju, we're going to break down illustration number 2 as much as I can over an audio. In fact, I took all the practical martial arts students through that last night, and they really seemed to have a good time with it. And then lastly, I'll summarize the 5 episodes of this series. I wanted to also say thank you all very much who have reached out to me during the series. I learned something here about podcasting that I had not experienced to the same level that I did as in this particular series. I realized that if you make a mistake in front of someone, like on a group, or if you're giving a presentation or something along those lines, you make that error once. And then at the end of that particular speech or whatever, you move on. But if you make a mistake on a podcast, you make that mistake every time that podcast is downloaded or replayed. That's a lot of times to be making a mistake over and over again. And the reason it comes up is that in the first episode, and I believe once on the second episode, I said Paul McCarthy rather than Patrick McCarthy as the author of the Bubishi. And I got several notes from you all making me aware of that error. And so first I want to say thank you very much for taking the time to reach out and send me that note. I do. I mean that sincerely. Thank you. Second, I went back and I re-recorded over and re-uploaded so that any future episodes downloaded are now corrected. And then third, I would like to apologize to Mr. McCarthy. When you hear this, thank you for being patient with me and the incredible hard work you've done putting together the book, The Bubishi. So, let's get ourselves ready and let's get on it. The final part of the series of bringing the Bubishi back to its Chinese roots. Xiaofa, as movements of attack and defense, were the physical manifestations of that art's principal theories. Each Xiaofa came into being and could only come into being through the interaction of the yin or internal components, such as the art's theories and principles, and the actual exposition in both oral and written form of the art's tactics and its focus. Those had to be simultaneously connected with the yin and the yang. The physical movements had to be cultivated through a trained body. So what all of that basically means is that Xiaofa Koju are very much the yin and yang capsules of a martial arts principles and its tactics. As explained in the General TM Bubishi, a martial art is defined by its principles. Therefore, a different set of principles will manifest a different art. The principles, not forms and movements, are the things that make an art special and distinguishes it from other arts. And because Xiaofa encapsulates the art's principles, the Chinese practitioners would make an effort to keep those things secret. After all, if it was your livelihood, would you just toss it out there for anyone? I thought what we would do is take one of the illustrations and consider the mnemonic. Illustration number 2 of the book. On the right, it says, Black Tiger leaves the cage, hand method wins. And on the left, it says the white monkey steals fruit, hand method loses. A note here that Mr. Nissan makes is that the black tiger leaves the cage, hand method can also be translated as black tiger sneaks out of the fence. As we said in the definition of a mnemonic, it is a pattern of letters, ideas, and associations that help you remember something. This is something that you're going to want to remember because in these lines, black and white, tiger and monkey, these are all yin and yang pairs. That's not coincidental. The tiger and the monkey are both creatures on the opposite sides of the Chinese zodiac. These give you an additional hint to the scene of the movement. Because a monkey stealing fruit isn't just about the snatching of something, it's also about their ploy, their distractions, their pacing, their waiting, and their awareness that there's an opening, and as soon as they sense it, they're going to seize it. The tiger, however, is aware of the monkey's ploys, and the tiger hates to be fooled. So the tiger sits aware, and when the monkey gets near, the tiger issues an attack that disrupts the monkey's ploy before he can ever steal the fruit. I'm going to tell you a quick story about a classmate I had named Kevin, and this will only take a minute, so please just bear with me. He was a member of the U.S. Army, and he was extremely good in Muay Thai and had a boxing background. And his chole foot was Class A. He was absolutely perfect at setting you up. Now, one day I was sparring with him, and I got tired of getting hit. And I mean, he would hit me, and I couldn't seem to figure out how to get him stopped. And my instructor comes over and he says, "Look, stop playing his game. You're never going to beat him at it. When he starts with his distractions, get quiet. When he comes into your crosshairs, seize him." And with that instruction, I began to learn how to play my game. and to work my ideas. And it is also where I began to execute one of my top 3 techniques, which came into play quite a bit there, the Xingyi tiger leaping from the mountain. And interestingly enough, at a moment in time, it looks very much like the illustration. The tiger is acting with absolute direction and comes out without hesitation, usually sending the monkey to run away if it's lucky, or it doesn't get away if it's not so lucky. So let's bring this section of the Wu Beiji to a close. In regards to the book, The General Tea in Wu Beiji, Ben states that it is clearly a labor of love and makes historical contributions. Another good thing about this text is that what they saw, you saw. The authors do not attempt to insert words into areas of missing text. As they point out, this interpolation is already available from other sources. Mr. Nissan must be commended on the quality of his translations and editorial work, as the entire argument is laid out in such a way that it is clear and accessible to a wide range of followers who may not be familiar with Chinese martial arts history or society. With that glowing defense of the book, Ben now issues a little prosecution. Ben writes that as a scholar, this sort of accessibility, where almost anybody can follow it, comes at a cost. While this text is sure to reach a wide audience, serious researchers are going to find themselves wanting a more scholarly apparatus. For example, while there are footnotes throughout the book, it contains no index or reference section. Ben said he would get very frustrated with the book when he repeatedly found himself scanning back through 50 pages or more worth of footnotes in an attempt to identify the full citation of a reference that had sparked his interest. He says that if this book ever gets a second edition, these oversights need to be corrected. Readers will appreciate a glossary of Chinese names and specialized terms. Ben summarizes the whole thing by writing, "The authors made real progress in narrowing the dating of this text and locating it in the diplomatic Ryukyu Trade Tribute Station in Fuzhou, which housed the Confucian School. They argued that such works would be absolutely useless without the oral traditions of a master, and these insights could have only come from Chinese teachers. It is most likely that one or more of these students in Fuzhou got their hands on the book, then made copies." Ben and Andreas Quast agree that the beautifully reproduced paintings in this edition of the Bubishi show Chinese martial artists rather than their Okinawan students. This observation was based on many reference photographs of Chinese individuals who have arranged their top knot so that it cannot be grabbed in fighting or training. It also appears that many of the paintings strongly suggest that the forehead and even the back of the head of these figures have been shaved, as one might expect if they were the subjects of the Manchus. It seems eminently reasonable to assume that the Okinawan students were the ones who copied these paintings, yet they may very well have been working with their Chinese models. There is no doubt that Nissan and Louis' work, The General Tea in Wu Beiji, stands as a prime example of the gains to be had through this sort of textual detective work. The contributions of their book are many-fold. It will be valued by karate and kung fu students. It has also made important contributions to our historical understanding of the southern China's region's martial arts development as well. And so now, let's bring the series, the Bubishi, returning to its Chinese roots, to a close. My goal for this series of podcasts was to share with you this text, referred to as the Bubishi in Japanese and the Wu Beiji, from a variety of perspectives. Hopefully, it will be useful to someone who has never seen the document. For those who have the document and have not tried it, perhaps it will motivate you to look at it in a very productive manner. And for those who have studied it and tried it, like for example Mr. Jesse Enkamp has, it may help you move your martial practice a little further down the road. I also wanted to recognize one of the great workers on this text, Mr. Patrick McCarthy. Without his years of sincere effort, much of this conversation may not exist. Now, I had read at some point in the years past where Mr. McCarthy had written something along the lines that he thought that there was some grand prize out there for those who could discredit or dismean his work. And that is really sad. But it is also an important lesson for any of us to take with us moving forward. If you are a martial artist in your heart, for whatever reason that you might practice, in the future, reach deep and demonstrate your courage when you have the opportunity that is going to have an impact for everyone else. It is easy for others to sit over there and to try to rip you a new one. It is often very difficult that when you know you're getting ready to take a position or offer something up, that you're going to take some shots. And let me tell you, I'm feeling this way about the missionary in martial arts, and I've been talking about it for about 6 months now, because I know when that podcast comes out, I'm going to catch some shots. But I'm going to keep working on it anyway, and just like Mr. McCarthy, I would encourage you to keep working on your projects, your processes. Give it your perspective. Mr. McCarthy's work has developed into several editions of his book, the Bubishi, and I would highly recommend that you get the latest version, and you can use the link at kungfupodcast.com/Bubishi. During this podcast, you've heard from fine practitioners such as Ian Abernathy and his posts, and also Jesse Enkamp and how he used the Bubishi to help stimulate and make his imagination work through his process of his martial arts. We have also looked at it from the Okinawan karate transcript lineage perspectives, which pivoted around Funakoshi's works, his references, and as well as his non-references. The essay by Mr. Andrea Quast that is in the newest version of the Bubishi by Mr. McCarthy, and Ben described that chapter alone as being worth the price of the book. And that led us all to where we began to consider, why would Chinese martial artists not be making more use of the Wu Bei Ji? It is a Chinese martial arts training manual through and through. The 4 Kwans, the mindset of martial artists, the development of ourselves, Wu Dai, plus much, much more is sitting right there. The medicinal chapters of the book is also something I want to reflect on for just a few moments, because as they had talked about earlier, it was actually considered a medical document first that the martial arts was added to. And that can become a point of arguments, but it can also become a point of abuse. Remember that this was what that these people had access to and knowledge of at their time. In some cases, it is quite possible that what was referenced had nothing to do with about a medicinal component as much as it was about keeping one's hopes up that the medicine that you're going to receive may work. Also, when it comes to completely dismissing energy as an influential part of medicine and physical influence, I would encourage you to be temperate. I understand that it is often abused and turned into a circus act, and as well as this energy stuff is put out there irresponsibly and marketed as a form of self-defense. I get it. You're preaching to the choir. But do not forget that much of modern medicine and even modern weapons are based on new forms of manipulating and reading energy. For example, all the MRI scans are based on using energetic fields. And as well, magnetic fields have been shown to activate indigenous opioids in the brain. It's also important to remember that the term qi was used to explain many various phenomena that were not directly explainable at the time. This was something I just recently learned from a Chinese scholar who studies the Jesuit influence in Asia, and that is that in Chinese culture, they often do not dispose of a word even though its original meaning is no longer useful in today's lexicon. So when it comes to working with medicine, we might want to remember that Hippocrates' philosophy also focused more on patient care and the healing power of nature. The idea was simple enough. Nature, rather than the doctor, does most of the healing. And it has been documented that hope and faith saves lives. Every shaman, witch doctor, medicine man, every prayer, herbs, surgery, blessed lakes where you would get doused in, every form of treatment has been recorded to either work or fail over the centuries. So you may not believe that an acupoint works, but someone else may. And there is a golden rule in medicine. If you believe in the therapy and the provider, the course of treatment has an excellent chance of working. That principle, if you believe in the therapy and the provider, comes straight from many providers and studies associated with it. Consider this for a moment. Try it in reverse. When we're trying to explain biosciences to someone from another culture, they may have a totally different cultural belief system than you. And this is where the study, clinical methods, the history, physical, and laboratory examinations by Mr. Robert Push can help us, as it's posted in the National Center for Biotechnology Information, where they write, quote, "Biomedicine must use approaches that recognize and account for the views and values of the individual and of cultures, not only in determining the nature of a patient's problems, but also in describing solutions. To undertake this task, the practitioner must be prepared to accommodate to the dictates of biology as well as the experience of illness as it is perceived by the patient, his family, and his group." They go on by saying that in patient care settings, biomedical and popular systems of care must be viewed as parallel, often simultaneous activities. It is often necessary to reach an accommodation between them. The patient's views must be taken into account and dealt with. It is clear that popular or folk therapies often work, although at other times they may have a negative effect. When patients have special knowledge or views, for example, a cultural construct of cause and necessary therapy, these issues may need to be evaluated to a level of concern on par with a problem such as congestive heart failure, end quote. So with all that, their point is clear. The belief system that is associated could be just as important as the symptom or the pathophysiology that you're dealing with. So a person's culture may have to be evaluated just as much as the congestive heart failure. So as you're looking through the document, I'm not encouraging you to take the medicinal component and use it. What I'm saying is that I hear a lot of folks who unnecessarily just throw it all underneath the bus. Just put it in its cultural time zone and their understanding and see if that helps you better understand more of the document. This literary lineage, the Chinese martial arts training manuals, is long and varied. As we pointed out in this series, there are many versions that are similar to the Bubishi, but they're also different, like Ip Man's copy that is on display at the museum. So lastly, let's go through the fixed points. We were discussing the Bubishi number 2, not the 17th century version, but the 19th century version. Fixed point number 2 when we began is that we recognized that there had been a lack of scientific methodology applied to the document. Fixed point number 3, we see that the oldest copy was in Okinawa around 1930, with evidence leading to portions of it existed at around 1880. Fixed point 4 was that once in Okinawa, the collection was initially passed down without any format titles, but it was exactly the same sort of structure you may have found in other Chinese martial manuals. The fifth point is the one that we give credit to Mr. Ian Abernathy with, is that even with the Bubishi in hand, practitioners do not often fully gain because of one of many reasons. I would encourage you to go to his forum and look that up. It's a good article, worth the time. Go to kungfupodcast.com/Ian. Fixed point number 6 is that Funakoshi was the pivotal part of this map for getting us from Okinawa back into China. Number 7, is that there is enough scholarly research that suggests that chapters of the Bubishi were written in a theme familiar to the late 1800s in China. Fixed point number 8, most, but not necessarily all, but almost all of the Chinese martial arts texts had a weapons section, and in many cases the tactics and techniques on how to work collectively, how to protect your village, how to work with one another. Its absence suggests an edited volume. Number 9 is that even if you had the Chinese document in hand, it is very difficult to read traditional Chinese, even for the Chinese. Point number 10 is that many Chinese martial artists mistakenly don't use the text at all. And it could have been that it was initially marketed as the Bible of Karate. But many people will look at the Bubishi and the Wubeiji and then silently just move right past it, never open it, never study it. Or worse, they just mock it. Point number 11 is that the General Tien Wubeiji is a new and separate text that brings a unique perspective on the previous editions. It's been tested and verified for authenticity, and it's been dated by researchers using 7 separate variables. Point number 12, our martial arts ancestors, in order to practice, teach, and survive, as they moved from place to place, required an understanding of trauma care and Chinese medicine that was appropriate for their time. This fact on its own would give that manuscript economical value. Fixed point number 13 is that the cultural deity known as General Tien is an important influence to understanding the Chinese martial arts, as well as getting a fundamental understanding of the Confucian thought process. Point number 14 is to decipher any of these texts along with the illustrations, you must open your mind beyond your current cultural environment. In many cases, a literal translation is not even going to come close. JJ did tie buckle. If you imagine the cultural time and environment as it was being utilized and shared, you might gain much, much faster. And then lastly, fixed point number 15. Regardless of the style of the martial arts that you practice, a good and thorough read and implementation where it is appropriate for you of both the Bubishi by Mr. Patrick McCarthy and the General Tien Wubeiji is a very, very good idea. I hope you enjoyed the podcast. I know that I've learned a lot through this process over the past couple of months in studying this and trying to organize it in a way that hopefully would mean something to you. Exploring the culture, the adventure, and the impact of martial arts. Thank you so much for joining me as we were taking the Bubishi back to its Chinese roots. I hope you have a great practice. Keep yourself going. Get yourself those manuscripts. Put them somewhere in your library, but don't let them sit there. Keep them close by. And if you come across with ideas, hey, don't keep them to yourself. We'd love to hear from you. KungFuPodcast.com. Send me a note, and maybe we can do something with it on a future episode. Take care of yourself, and I'll be talking with you soon.